Hello everyone, I want to welcome you back to Just My Stupid Opinion, and for those of you watching me on YouTube, this is my face. For the last few episodes, I've just been using my avatar instead of me, but I'm thinking about just jumping in all the way, and just do the whole face thing. So today we're going to be talking about Venezuela, and for those who haven't been paying attention over the last few months, Venezuela has fallen into a crisis. For a long time, this was one of the countries that was held up by people on the far left as an example of how socialism can work. Look to Venezuela. Its people are doing great. The economy is flourishing. Socialism can work. Well, apparently their chickens have come home to roost. So over the last few months, there have been violent clashes between government and anti-government protesters. The conditions there have been terrible. I found as I looked into this, I found some reminiscence to the history of Soviet Russia. The same sort of things were happening. But let's look into the most recent event. The most recent event happened Sunday, the 6th of August, and Venezuela authorities quelled an attack on a military base near the city of Valencia by soldiers and armed civilians, killing 2 of them in a dramatic escalation of unrest in protest-convulsed South American nation. Residents who live near the army base in Valencia reported hearing bursts of gunfire around 4:30 a.m. 20 men entered the base and managed to reach the gun depot undetected, but then an alarm sounded, alerting troops to the incursion. 10 of the invaders fled, some carrying off arms, while those who left behind exchanged gunfire with soldiers until about 8 a.m., before all were either killed or captured. 2 of the attackers were killed in the firefight. Socialist Party officials said 8 others were arrested, including at least 3 from the military, while the remainder made off with the weapons. So, the conditions inside Venezuela have been terrible recently, and their leader, Maduro, has been more and more moving towards a dictatorship. In fact, just recently, people have pretty much declared him as a dictator. The international community has condemned him as a dictator as of these days. So apparently, some of their military officials and civilians were pissed off enough to take up arms and attack a military base. You don't do that when things are going well or when your leadership is going well. When asked on the matter, Maduro said, "We know where they are headed and all of our military and police force is deployed." He said that he would ask for maximum penalty for those who participated in this terrorist attack. The attack came as Venezuela's controversial Constitutional Assembly is going down to work, signaling in its initial decrees last week that delegates will target Maduro's foes as he had warned. He's already started targeting some of those foes. This has been building up for some time. These have been accusations that have been leveled against him for some time. But most recently, 2 of the opposition leaders were arrested by him. This is a classic power grab. The same sort of thing happened in Soviet Russia. After the October Revolution, when Lenin installed himself as leader, he targeted the other party members almost immediately. This is just reminiscent to what happened in 1917. Holy crap, this is 100 years later and almost the same thing. Funny, time goes on, but socialism never changes. Sunday's attack was apparently led by Juan Carlos Guerripano, a former Nationalist Guard captain. Authorities published photos purported to show 7 arrested men, some of them with bruises on their faces. This is not a coup d'etat at a Guerripano, who was removed from the National Guard in 2014, according to the document seen by Reuters. This is a civic and military action to re-establish constitutional order, but more than that, it is to save the country from total destruction. I completely understand this because, as I've already stated, I see the similarities between this and Soviet Russia when it came into power, the way that their leaders are acting, the way the regime is acting. So you can't really be surprised that people are going to take up arms against them. Hell, the same thing still happened. Lenin and Stalin had to put down a few smaller revolutions themselves. In 4 months of street protests across the country, which began after Venezuela's Supreme Court, dominated by supporters of President Maduro, ruled to strip the opposition-dominated parliament of its powers, accusing lawmakers of contempt after allegations of irregularities by 3 opposition lawmakers during the 2015 election. The ruling, which was denounced as a coup by the opposition, was later reversed, but massive street protests against the Maduro government continued. As Venezuela's crisis has deepened, with triple-digit inflation, record shortages of food and medicine, and rising crime rates, Maduro has sought to rebuild his popular support by calling for a constituent assembly to rewrite the country's anti-capitalist constitution, crafted by his political godfather, the late President Hugo Chavez. And everything that we're starting, as they stated, that we're starting to see because of this, the triple-digit inflation, record shortages of food, medicine, rising crime rates, these are all happened before, and they'll all happen again. Every socialist country that has fallen beforehand has seen these exact same things. So the problem was that Venezuela, Maduro, Hugo Chavez, the two of them. So the problem is it started with Hugo Chavez and it continued with Maduro, where they started putting everything, their whole economy was based on oil. So when oil prices dropped, suddenly they lost all that money. And they already had started up a bunch of social programs. So those started to get cut. You're cutting your social programs, and it's like a domino effect. You just keep, one knocks over, then the other one falls, the other one falls. You can't stay ahead of it. You can't get the money back because socialism is just spend, spend, spend. So when you're spending that much and your whole social fabric relies on you spending so much, when suddenly you can't make that one payment, everything else falls from there. Because you got to pull the money from somewhere else in order to keep this social program up. And it just gets shaky from there. The foundation can't hold, and it all falls. This is why socialism can't work. I don't know how many times we have to see it over and over again, and it really pains me because I have a friend from Venezuela. She's here. She's not there right now, and it just pains me because I can only imagine the sort of shit that her family's going through. So why are the people so against the government? Aside for the obvious, of course. But politically, where is the split? Venezuela is split into Chavitas, the name given to the followers of the socialist policies of the late President Hugo Chavez, and those who cannot wait to see an end of the 18 years in power of his United Socialist Party. After the socialist leader died in 2013, Nicolas Maduro, also of the United Socialist Party, was elected president on a promise to continue Mr. Chavez's policies. But the opposition says that since his party came into power in 1999, the Socialist Party has eroded Venezuela's democratic institution and mismanaged its economy. Chavitas, in turn, accused the opposition of being elitist and of exploiting poor Venezuelans to increase their own riches. Of course they do. Because when Hugo Chavez died, he was a very rich man. You know who else was a very rich man when he died? Fidel Castro, another communist leader. And look at the lives of Lenin and Stalin and Mao. All these socialist leaders, the elite live great. The rest of us live like shit. And that would extend to you and me. It's the regular everyday people. I work an average job, make an average paycheck, so I'd be starving on the streets along with everybody else. This is why I'm not crazy about this sort of shit coming to my country. I used to be more in support of socialism, except when you look into it, it really doesn't work the way you want it to. It's great on paper. It's not great in practice. The Chavitas also alleged that the opposition leaders are in the pay of the United States, a country with which Venezuela has had fraught relations in recent years. This might be true, but U.S. is also one of Venezuela's biggest trading partners, if not probably actually the biggest trading partner. So I could actually understand where the rest of the country is coming from. These are the people that are trading with them, keeping their economy going right now, giving them the products they need to survive. So if I was in their situation, I would be a lot more pro-US. I think anybody who was looking at the situation objectively would be in support of this opposition over the current government. Oil accounts for 95% of Venezuela's export revenues, as I stated earlier, and it was used to finance the many generous social programs. One of these has provided more than 1 million poor Venezuelans with homes. So when you take the money out of there, suddenly all these people relying on this social program don't have a home. And then what happens when that social program deals with the food? Same problem. Suddenly you don't have a home and you don't have food. And this is where the dominoes fall. A series of events has further heightened tensions between the government and the opposition, and it has led to renewed street protests. Key was the surprise announcement by the Supreme Court on the 29th of March 2017 that it was taking over the powers of the opposition-controlled National Assembly. The opposition said that the ruling undermined the country's separation of powers. And took Venezuela a step closer to one-man rule under President Nicolas Maduro. Of course it does, because it's mostly dominated by Maduro's men, the Supreme Court. And now they've just taken over the opposition's assembly. Like, that is a complete power grab. This is similar shit happened in 1917, 1918 Russia. We've already been through this. All you need to do is look up the history. None of this surprises me, because I've looked into it and I've read about it. Go read the Gulag Archipelago. Everything that is happening right now is laid out right there in the pages. It can sometimes be a little dry, but it's always interesting. But interesting in a bad way, because there's a lot of bad shit that happened. And again, going back to how the opposition leaders were arrested, they were pulled out in the middle of the night. This was some jackbooted thugs who broke into their home and arrested them. Just like in Soviet Russia, jackbooted thugs used to break into the homes of the dissenters and arrest them in the middle of the night before they could put up any fight. Exactly the same thing. So, in response to this power grab by Maduro, the opposition has 4 key demands that they want him to match. The removal of office of the Supreme Court justices who issued the 29th of March ruling. They want a general election in 2017. Creation of a humanitarian channel to allow medication to be imported to counter the severe shortages in Venezuela. Release all of the political prisoners arrested by the Maduro government. So, faced with these challenges, Maduro had to do something. And Maduro wasn't willing to go to elections because his popularity was starting to sink at that point. So he couldn't risk going to election. So he chose instead to announce a constituent assembly. Constituent assembly is essentially going to rewrite the Venezuelan constitution. Except he gets to appoint who goes to the assembly. Yet essentially his people are going to rewrite the constitution. What do you think he's going to do? So President Maduro says the opposition is trying to illegally overthrow his elected government and blame the country's problems on an economic war being waged against him. He argues that the new constitution will neutralize the opposition and defeat coup plotters and thereby promote peace in Venezuela. In 1917, when Lenin came into power, he immediately labeled certain people as the enemy. And when Lenin died and Stalin took over, the same thing continued to happen. Anybody who didn't agree with the government was considered a wrecker, a dissenter. This one is a coup plotter. So now, if you don't support Maduro, you're thinking, I'd like to vote for somebody else. You're a dissenter. You're a wrecker. And you wait because a jackbooted thug comes in the middle of the night, busts down your door, and takes you away to some god-awful prison. Because that's the next step. As we're going to watch this, we're going to watch about mass killings and god-awful prison conditions. Unless Maduro gets forced out of power sometime soon, we're not going to hear about it right away. But sooner or later, we're going to start hearing about the terrible conditions of Venezuela prisons. The torturing, the malnutrition. I'm calling it right now. Maduro's trying to get the new constitution, saying it will neutralize the opposition and defeat coup plotters. The opposition leaders have denounced the move as an attempt by President Maduro to maximize his power and cling to it for longer. They argued that the process of setting up a constituent assembly, and drawing up a new constitution would almost certainly mean that the regional election due to be held this year and presidential polls scheduled for December 2018 would be delayed. They also fear that the Constituent Assembly would further weaken the National Assembly, Venezuela's opposition-controlled legislative body. The National Assembly leader Julio Borges called it a scam to deceive the Venezuelan people with a mechanism that is nothing more than a tightening of the coup in Venezuela. Of course, it's a classic technique. You tell the people you're fighting for them. You tell the people that you will give them peace. You will give them freedom. And in the process of writing the laws that give them freedom, you end up really taking it away. You act as their savior when really you're their executioner. It's really pretty classic, pretty basic. You don't even have to look to Soviet Russia. Just look to just about any dictatorship. There's one thing I wanted to point out too. Let's just take a look at Maduro for a minute. Doesn't this guy fucking look like Stalin? Does he not? It looks to me like we're just reliving Soviet Russia all over again. Hugo Chavez was Lenin. He got everything installed. He got the ball rolling. In comes Maduro after Chavez dies, takes over, and then he's going to be the real brutal one, the one that commits most of the terrible acts, the ones who commits the murderous acts. And he looks like Stalin. He fucking looks like Stalin. I wish Venezuela good luck. This whole election that they've been talking about has been took place on the 30th of July 2017. And in this election, the Venezuelan voters, they chose from 364 constitutional representatives distributed across municipalities and state capitals, and another 180 so-called sectoral candidates from demographic groups ranging from students to farmers to fishermen. That didn't even sound like a vehicle. That sounded like a goddamn giant bug flying by. The opposition Democratic Unity Coalition is boycotting the vote. They say the use of sectoral candidates who had to collect signatures and file them to the government-leaning election councils was a way to weed out anti-government aspirants. Absolutely it was. They got to give it, essentially they're giving them to the government. Is the government just going to accept somebody who looks very popular, who's running against them and they might lose to? Absolutely, I agree 100%. Critics fear the Constituent Assembly would allow Maduro to postpone the 2018 election that many think he has a good chance of losing amid the economic crisis that has gripped Venezuela. Maduro, however, has vowed that the presidential election will be held at the end of 2018, come rain, thunder, or lightning in Venezuela. By the time that Venezuelans actually go to the polls, there'll be one name on the voting card, and all you'll be able to vote for is for Maduro. So Maduro claimed victory in an internationally criticized election for an assembly to rewrite the constitution, but the opposition cried fraud and vowed to keep protesting despite a deadly crackdown. 10 people were killed in a wave of bloodshed that swept Venezuela on Sunday as Maduro defied an opposition boycott and international condemnation, including the threat of new U.S. sanctions, to hold the elections for a powerful new constituent assembly. Members of the new assembly will include Maduro's wife, Celia Flores, his pugnacious right-hand man, Diosdado Cabello, and other staunch allies. He's not even trying anymore. Maduro is not even trying to be discreet. The socialist president is gambling his 4-year rule on the 545-member assembly, which will be empowered to dissolve the opposition-controlled Congress and rewrite the Constitution. Dissolve Congress as well. Well, I think everything is going just fine in Venezuela. The Maduro government has been the most openly critical of the United States in Latin America. The country's economy has struggled with low oil prices, but critics say government mismanagement has vastly exacerbated the problem, causing hyperinflation and widespread shortage of food and medicine. It definitely has, because just over the last few weeks, the currency they use, it has dropped significantly compared to the American dollar. Just over the last few weeks, it is At one point, I think it was something about 6,000 for per US dollar, and then it just became 10,000 over a course of a few weeks. And that's because they are printing their money like crazy, and suddenly it's watering it down. Their money isn't worth anything anymore. That's another way to kill your economy. Make your money worthless. And there have been reports of people that are eating garbage because there's not enough food to go around. And some of them are even trying to cross the border into neighboring countries just to be able to purchase food and bring it home to their family. They're going to another country to buy food. Does this look like socialism works? I believe even during the 2016 election, Bernie Sanders, one of the guy that I was supporting initially until he lost the Democratic nomination, or I should say stole it from him, he used to hold up Venezuela as an example of how it could do well, how a country could do well. Not anymore. He completely stopped mentioning it. As soon as these crises go on, just like that, he completely forgot about Venezuela. Well, you can't ignore the fact that a country you were holding up as sort of a utopia is suddenly fallen into chaos. Suddenly it's become a dystopia. But then again, we were saying the same thing a few decades ago about the USSR. We were saying that it was a communist paradise. Everything is going very well over there. Oh shit, millions dead and everybody starving? Ah, fuck. Maduro faces accusations at home and abroad of trampling on democracy with the election last weekend of the assembly in a vote boycotted by the opposition and allegedly marred by fraud. Venezuela's pro-government electoral authority has claimed that more than 8 million voters took part, 40% of the electorate. The opposition says turnout was closer to 3.5 million, mostly state employees fearful for their jobs. Maduro has denied the accusation of an inflated turnout figure, dismissing it as a reaction by the international enemy. So apparently the opposition is the international enemy now. And this is another common tactic used by socialists, is make everybody the enemy. So suddenly you're always on the moral high ground. And if you're still on the fence about this, if you're still not sure and you want to maybe still try and defend what's going on in Venezuela, all you really need to know is that Maduro has banned the protests over the vote, threatening prison terms of up to 10 years. 10 years to protest over. Now, I know there has been a lot of violence going on with the protests in Venezuela, but that has been mostly pro-government forces that have been doing the killing. Even if things have been violent in the protests, it's still the pro-government forces. And B, being able to protest is one of the most democratic things you can do. It's the right of the people to protest its government when they don't feel that they're doing the right job. That is classical liberal philosophy. And when you're going to ban people being able to protest, you've got a real problem. You've got a real free speech problem. And that's a common problem in dictatorships. So prosecutors have said 10 people were killed in violence around the vote, bringing the death toll in 4 months of protests to more than 120. Those killed included a candidate for the new assembly, a regional opposition leader, 2 teenage protesters, and a soldier in the western state of Táchira, which saw some of the worst violence. According to polling firm Data Analysis, more than 70% of Venezuelans oppose the idea of the new assembly, and 80% reject Maduro, whose term is meant to end in 2019. The number of Venezuelans living abroad has soared as the once booming oil producer has descended into a devastating economy crisis marked by shortages, runaway inflation, riots, and looting. So Maduro moved swiftly to consolidate his authority after the election. 2 prominent opposition leaders were hustled off to jail in the middle of the night by armed members of the Venezuelan intelligence services. Security forces and pro-government motorbike gangs actively stamp out public signs of dissent. So they are going back to the ancient Roman tactic of using street gangs to enforce your will. Oh, this is going to end well. Delcy Rodriguez, a former foreign minister who is now part of the new body, said the Constituent Assembly will kick the lawmakers out of the chamber they occupy in the Legislative Palace, take it over, and never leave. Chile, meanwhile, said 6 Venezuelan opposition figures were taking refuge in its assembly in Caracas. 4 of them were judges named by the opposition to sit on a parallel Supreme Court to counter the high tribunal stacked with pro-Maduro magistrates. The 6 were seeking diplomatic protection, but no request for asylum has been received, according to Chilean officials. You're probably all getting annoyed with me right now, but in Soviet Russia, opposition leader need to run away too, because you die, or you get put into prison. This is the reality of living underneath a social government, a social dictator government. What else can you do but run away? Because if it's to the point where you can't even fight back, because fighting back means your life is destroyed, or hell, you'll be killed. And you're going to be killed just for holding these ideas because they know in the past you've been opposed to them. All you can do is run, which is what they're doing, which is what they did in Soviet Russia, which is happening now. I seriously recommend that anybody watching this that doesn't really know much about Soviet Russia, go look it up. And then look back at this, and you'll see the similarities between the two. There are some, I shouldn't say some, there are many on the left that are defending this as not socialism. They'll give plenty of excuses, corruption being one of the big ones. They're absolutely right. Corruption is one of the things that is leading to this problem. Have you not realized yet that socialism and corruption come hand in hand? They really always do. I said before that early on in the election, Bernie Sanders was the guy I supported. Now, I'm not as left-wing as I was during those days when Bernie Sanders was running. I've moved more towards classic liberalism now. I'm not a leftist anymore. I don't know how far along the left I really was. My point is Bernie Sanders and his wife right now, they're being investigated for fraud. And despite the fact Bernie Sanders talks about all the problems, the 1%, the 0.01%, the 0.001%, he's always bringing up numbers all the time. Despite all this, Bernie Sanders is a rich fucking guy. And he owns multiple homes. Something he should not have if he is a true democratic socialist. Because as somebody who has much, he should be giving back to the people who have less. Why aren't you, Bernie? Why aren't you giving back to the poor people? You were fighting for them in the election, but here's another way to help them. The way you're supposed to redistribute the wealth, the way you believe it's supposed to be done, and you're not redistributing your wealth. A little bit of hypocrisy there, don't you think? And one's news source, Al Jazeera, was one of the defenders saying that it was not socialism that is responsible for this. Well, I think they're wrong, and I think they made some pretty weak arguments in the video that they made. So we're going to take a quick look through, and we're going to counter some of the points that they're talking about.
Venezuela is embroiled in a major crisis, but don't worry, it's easy to understand, and you only need to know one word: socialism.
Did socialism cause Venezuela's hell? Of course.
Actually, blaming socialism for Venezuela's riches to rags story is grossly misleading. Yes, under a system of governance known as Chavismo, the state, as in socialism, tightly controls the world's largest known oil reserves and subsidizes numerous large-scale social programs. But faulting socialism for the current problems ignores the improvements under Chavismo. You know, those silly communist ideas like access to education or healthcare. Even the World Bank, not exactly a fan of Chavez, said economic growth and redistribution policies led to a significant decline in poverty and inequality.
Yeah, and look at it now. It's a complete shit show. It's completely full of inequality and poverty. People are eating out of trash cans. See, just because it worked for a little bit doesn't mean it's not going to fall eventually. See, the problem is, and there's a great quote, I can't remember who to attribute it to right now, but they said the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. They were relying on the exports, which literally is other people's money. So once that stopped coming in, all of a sudden the country fell apart. It's just when oil prices were high, they were doing well. Everything was based on their oil. Socialism really is responsible because everything in their economy was paying to support everybody, and when that money stopped coming in, it failed. It's pretty simple to understand.
The state, Venezuela has some surprising traits. The private sector still provides most of economic activity, and the United States is Venezuela's largest trading partner. So what went wrong? Well, perhaps this has less to do with ideology and more to do with leadership.
Oh, it definitely has to do with leadership. But it can still only sustain itself for a certain amount of time.
Now, while the Maduro government blames the crisis on foreign intervention and meddling by the opposition, it no doubt has repeatedly shot itself in the foot. Take oil, for example. The country has earned trillions of petrodollars, but it's failed to diversify its economy and remains totally oil dependent. And in recent years, with tanking prices, the economy has plummeted. But here's the problem. Economic policies have failed to adjust to reality. The government continues to print money to sustain its spending, while also propping up its foreign exchange rate at fantasy levels, resulting in the highest inflation rate in the world. To add insult to injury, Venezuela is the 10th most corrupt country in the world. Again, little to do with socialism and a lot to do with poor governance. And Chavismo doesn't have a monopoly of economic mismanagement. Previous, more right-wing Venezuelan governments also ended up in crisis, with hyperinflation and protests on the streets. The socialism ruins everything charge also falls short when looking at Bolivia. It's currently experiencing significant growth and poverty reduction under, surprise, a so-called socialist government.
I guess we already have the next example of a great socialist nation. As I stated earlier, plenty of times, it was actually, in fact, Venezuela that everyone pointed to. Now it looks like it's going to be Bolivia. How long do you think till Bolivia falls? You know what? I predict in the next 10 years, and then they'll be looking to something else.
And thus far, its success relies upon better governance and sounder fiscal policies. Clearly, Venezuela is in chaos, but it's time to ditch the red herring of socialism if we want to better understand what's happening and in turn find much needed solutions.
Don't blame socialism, blame corruption. The two seem to have come hand in hand. I mean, just about every single socialist government has been corrupt. Cuba, Russia, China, Korea, Vietnam, now Venezuela. Brazil used to do really well. Brazil's economy used to be booming, but socialism has destroyed it over the last couple of years. It's been reduced to, well, its economy is destroyed, and it's because of socialist programs. It's not a problem if you want to mix capitalism with a little bit of socialist programs as long as you can support them. That's not the problem. The problem is when you're trying to support everything, everyone. Socialism, communism, that's supposed to be all about equality, making everybody equal. The problem with equality is, sure, it does make everybody equal. It makes them equally poorer. Everybody right now in Venezuela is starving. They're poor. Their poverty, 80% of Venezuelans live below what would be considered the American poverty line. 80% of them. You see, equally poor across the board. That's what it does for all of us. So the next time an election is coming up and you're looking at that more socialist candidate and what they want to do, it sounds really nice. But just remember to ask yourself a few questions. 1, where is the money coming from? Because it costs a lot of money to support this. And B, how long can we support it? Because socialist programs tend to rack up a lot of debt, and they seem to, sooner or later, if you don't make sure they're supported well enough, they will fall. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is Just My Stupid Opinion. I want to thank you for joining me today. If you're watching this on YouTube, like this video and click subscribe below. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.